Hello and welcome to Extra Time. This is episode 3 of our 4-part series with our friends at Muckle, and we're going to be taking a deep dive into leadership and how it brings together all the different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle around football governance. They're back for a second episode as well. We're delighted to say we have Tom and Carla. The pair of you were so brilliant at explaining legal structures. We had to bring you back to talk to us about leadership. But for those who are perhaps watching this and haven't met you before, introduce yourselves, tell us about your roles and what you do at Muckle.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Carla Boaks. I'm a solicitor in the Sports, Education and Charities team at Muckle, and we are really delighted to be the legal advisors for the FA.
Yeah, and I'm Tom Seed. I'm also a solicitor and also in the Sports, Education and Charities team. And we basically specialise in club legal structures and governance.
You've got lots of specialities, lots of knowledge for us to make the most of, and for volunteers watching this as well, because as we spoke about in this series, governance is a really important pillar upon which all the other aspects of running a football club rely upon. We wanted to do an episode around leadership. So let's start by hearing your definitions of what leadership is, especially in this kind of football sports context.
Yeah, so I think leadership, it's about sort of crafting a shared vision for the club, which starts from the top down. And I think the leaders of the club should know how they want the club to look, not just sort of next season, but over the next 10, 15 years. So both in terms of how the club engages with the wider community, as well as the ambition on the pitch. So I think good leaders will usually inspire, motivate others within their teams, and foster basically a positive environment to play football in.
Carla, when you think of leadership in the sporting context, what do you sort of see it as?
With leadership, and leadership in sport in particular, that it really is that sort of effective, really forward-thinking decisions that do really help sports clubs, football clubs to grow and to move forwards, and that's both sort of on the pitch growth, but also off the pitch as well. So leadership is just really important for the club as a round.
Yeah, I think we see sort of at the top of the game, especially how important it could be to have a strategy and to have a model to follow. I mean, if you think of teams like Brighton and Bournemouth and just how far they've taken it by having a clear vision and just running with it for sort of 10, 15 years.
It's interesting you say that as well, because those clubs, the ones that we think have been forward-thinking, progressive, more often than not, they're having success both on the pitch and off the pitch. And that doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of leaders setting a tone. And we're going to hear from some fantastic examples actually later on in this episode. But linking back, Carla, to hearing your answer there, from a legal perspective as well, the strategic leaders, do they tend to form certain roles on the committee? Because the workforce can be quite diverse, but I'm thinking, right, the chairman, the treasurer, are there roles that you think in particular should take that strategic responsibility?
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly right. There are particular roles within the leadership structure.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the sort of the leadership team, in a legal perspective, we're talking about those strategic club leaders, as you say, rather than the operational ones. So these are the people who they sit on the committees, they sit on the boards, they're ultimately responsible for the success or otherwise of the club. And they're usually the people who are legally on the hook as well. And sort of how they're referred to will usually depend on what your club's legal structure is. So if you're set up as a company, there'll be the board of directors. Whereas if you're a charity, they'll be referred to as board of trustees. And then if you're unincorporated, they'll usually just be the sort of management committee, or the committee is how they'll be referred to.
It's interesting to hear, because I think, again, in the landscape of sport and football, leaders look like so many different things. It's the captain on your football pitch. You might not necessarily have that strategic role on a committee or a board, but you're still a leader. But that distinction between those with the legal responsibility is quite important as well.
Yeah, but I think, as you say, it's important to give a nod to the operational leaders as well. So the sort of the coaches, the referees, the volunteers. So they're the sort of essential everyday heartbeat of the clubs.
Yeah, it's just having that clear sort of organogram and responsibilities, isn't it? And I think some of the best leaders are the ones that listen to the people, so their membership and understanding what their wants and needs from the football club are, but then being able to take that to strategic decisions, knowing what the legal entity is and what is possible, or what changes potentially need to be made to help keep their customers or the players or whoever that is coming back in the 5 to 10 years time around that strategic plan.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you say, it comes from the top down, and then it's important that all of the personnel throughout the club are aware of the vision. So like you say, the people who might not be technically the legal leaders of the club are still as important because of what they're doing on the pitch. So it's good for them to know what the vision is and what's coming from above.
And you meet lots of good leaders. So what are the key skills that they tend to share amongst them?
Yeah, so they would tend to be great at setting a strategic goal and direction for the club, for ensuring that the assets of the club are properly safeguarded against any risks, and also just ensuring that any rules and regulations that are applicable to the club are closely adhered to, and talking there things such as data protection, making sure that those rules and regulations are followed.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of thing we have to remind people to sort of know about. So things like policies and procedures. So if you're in the strategic leadership team, it's not really what you volunteer at a football club to know about, but it's your job to sort of have like health and safety, safeguarding policies, financial management policies, and that sort of thing. And it's your job to make sure that everyone at the club is educated about what their role is as part of these policies.
Well, building on the subject of good leaders and what makes a good leader, we're going to head over now to speak to James Lawson, who's chairman of Ramsgate Football Club, a wonderful step-free side who have achieved so much success since he took over as chairman. Let's find out more about him and his football club now. James, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure. I know you're a very busy man, chairman and owner of Ramsgate FC, a thriving community club. My first question for you is, I wanted to ask, what made you want to take the reins and become a football leader, both on and off the pitch?
Basically, I've got historical ties to the football club for when I was 4 or 5 years old, with my dad being involved. The family kind of moved away from it to a much larger extent. And then my kids started playing football, and I was going to coach my eldest son. And I kind of thought, well, if I'm going to take a side on, what better side than Ramsgate? And that was about 2017. So I just spent a few years as a youth coach, eventually ended up kind of running the youth section. And then I kind of had this, there was kind of a little bit of upheaval at the club. So then I just kind of had this idea of, what about kind of a youth section taking over a senior club? And that's been the result of the last 5 years.
Wow, I love that. I'm sure there are volunteers listening who can understand when you begin volunteering how you take on more and more. But to go from a volunteer coach to the chairman with so much responsibility on your shoulders. You mentioned joining the club in 2017. When you did take that step up, what were the immediate things you noticed that you thought, I need to get a handle on here, that I might need to change, correct, or really solidify?
What I really noticed was youth sections are vibrant. There's lots of people, there's lots of families, there's lots of interest to this, there's lots of passion. People love youth football. And I kind of noticed, I'd always noticed I've been involved in non-league football for 20 years, how there's a kind of disconnect between youth sections and senior clubs. Senior clubs, like the big turnstile fees. There's lots of barriers. So you often found that senior clubs and youth clubs were run with different board members, different committee. And I often thought, why are senior clubs not taking on this passion that's in this youth section with these kids and these parents that are wearing your colours and kind of merging them a little more? And I think we're amongst the highest crowds in Kent now, and I would say certainly we have the highest proportion of women and families and children watching us. So the kind of merge of youth into senior football went perfectly.
How did that merger go? Did you need to do anything from a governance perspective, like structurally, to bring those two and build that cohesiveness?
There's a lot of mistrust within football that youth section money is used on senior football, used to basically pay for the centre forward. So I knew that if we was going to really enlarge the youth section, and that was the other thing, obviously, if you're going to take this model and you really want to grow the senior club, you want to enlarge the youth section, because the more people in the youth section, the more potential supporters you're creating. So I was aware that this could be a point of concern. So we set the youth section up as a CIO. The youth section is a registered charity. And the benefit of that is that everything's published on the Charity Commission website. All the finances are published annually. So there can be no kind of debate as to where the money's being used. It's there. It's on the youth section. And of course, the main company itself is the main football club's run as a limited company. So yeah, so we set up a CIO and a limited company.
And that can be a challenge, especially, as I mentioned, volunteers are at the heartbeat of grassroots football. And for you, did you have any support? Were you able to use perhaps your experience away from football to help you manage all of that operational structure? Where did you go to make sure that you were making those right steps at the very sort of infancy of your reign as chairman?
So I've had my own companies since 2010, 2011, and one of them is a training company. So I'm very aware of governance, but I'm also aware that you just, when you're in situations like this, you go to professionals. So I went to a solicitors and an accountants that I know quite well, and in truth that they took the baton from there.
It's important, isn't it, to make sure that that advice is spot on. So that was your sort of initial massive chunk of work, and it's clearly provided such a foundation. You mentioned the crowds have been growing, the youth section's thriving, the first team's been promoted, so many examples of success. What have been your real highlights in your tenure so far as chairman?
So there's one thing that always sticks in my mind. Whenever I've been involved around non-league football, I always found that the directors' boxes were full, but the stands were empty. And I kind of just had an image in my head of empty directors' boxes and full stands. And we absolutely have that now. I mean, all of the guys that are involved in our committee, they all stand in with the fans. They're all supporters. And like you say, volunteers are so important. The fact that the club secretary, the general manager, the media team are all supporters first and become volunteers. I think our social media presence is huge because Dan, who's got a company called Raw Video, his social media expertise is not something the Ramsgate Football Club could afford. But because he's a fan first, that's why we get such brilliant productions.
It's interesting hearing you speak and identifying already the key roles around you, supporting you as chairman. And this episode is all about sort of leadership. As a leader within the football club, how important is it for you to have a structure where you have a club secretary, you have maybe a finance secretary, you mentioned general manager, a media team, everyone with really clear roles and responsibilities? Because more often or not, I think we all fall into that challenge of always wanting more volunteers, and perhaps sometimes too much can fall on too fewer people, and that can be a real burden for sustainability.
100%. So when the first thing that I decided when I took over was this model of mine of creating the largest youth section and then making that the senior club, that is only going to work if we've got a 3G. So we went down the road and we put a 3G in at the club. And then I'm like, okay, now we've got the 3G, we've got to grow the football club. So you can get organic growth by adding 3 or 4 teams every year, make sure you don't lose any teams. But there was a very large local grassroots team called Thanet Colts, run by a guy that I know really well, Ian Heath. And I went and spoke to Ian, and Ian, after a few months of chatting, Ian merged Thanet Colts into Ramsgate Football Club, and that brought about 250 players immediately into the club. But it didn't just bring the players, it brought Ian's setup. And to answer your question more directly, Ian, who'd been running grassroots football for 20 years, was very aware of everything you've just said, that you can't have too much responsibility and too many tasks with one person. So he had a great model of Thanet Colts of about 30 volunteers, all doing a very, very small amount. So he had fixtures secretary just for the under 5s and the under 9s, and referee secretaries just for certain age groups. And what that meant was that if somebody was sick, somebody was ill, somebody left, it was only a very small number of tasks to replace. So it was a great model. And also, I think in society as a whole, the kind of, probably with the rising cost of living, the desire to volunteer or the ability to volunteer is certainly falling away. We're seeing that. But if people are supporters and they do want to help the club, they will give you a couple of hours a week. So that's where we're moving to now. Like, we've got lots of people offering a few hours support,
Which is so brilliant to hear. And I know that the plans are bright for the future as well. You're working with our friends at Muckle. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with the FA Club programme and how that's linked in to the Muckle services as well.
Yeah, of course. So there's an FA scheme called the Home Advantage programme, and basically, I forget the numbers, but they're looking to develop a lot of pavilions around the country. To the clubs obviously regularly use pavilions in parks as changing facilities. So they're offering £250,000 to the clubs to do up these pavilions, which is brilliant because it's not just the football club benefiting; it's the whole local community benefiting. So this football money is going into local parks, local pavilions that have perhaps been neglected for 30, 40 years. And a big part of the programme isn't just to upgrade the changing room facilities, it's to put community space in. So the money's being used to create an area where people can go and do yoga in the day, or perhaps different groups can use it just to meet up to have a tea and coffee and a chat. So it's brilliant that the football money is being used to create kind of a better facilities for those local communities. Sorry, just to continue on your question regarding Muckle, they're very complicated processes. The council have to issue the clubs with a long-term lease. The money that's being used to spend on the pavilion has to be issued to the clubs. There has to be lots of safeguards from the Football Foundation as to exactly how that money is going to be used. So there's lots of points in this process, and that's been one of the things that's impressed me most about Muckle supporting us with this. They kind of have a good understanding of working with football clubs, a good understanding of working with councils, a good understanding of working with the Football Foundation, and as part of the Home Advantage programme, all of that needs to be tied together.
Brilliant stuff. I'm so pleased to hear it. And finally, James, what do you think makes a good leader of a thriving community club?
I would say I think about this a lot because people use the term community, and I often wonder, what does it actually mean? My feelings on it are it's just kindness. So it's, are you acting with every action you take? Is it out of kindness? Is it for the right reasons? And is it helping and supporting people? I think if the answer to that, to your actions, you can answer yes to them questions 9 times out of 10, then it's probably what I would consider community.
James, what a fantastic final answer. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really interesting to connect with you and to hear and see, as I mentioned to you, I'm not too far away from Ramsgate FC, the journey that you've been on. And I know what is to come is going to be even more success. So thank you so much.
Super. Thank you, Charlotte.
So another example of a brilliant football club, this one down in Kent. So sort of the final question to you both. Can you truly have too many good leaders within an organisation?
Yes, actually, yes, you can. If we're looking at good governance, that would suggest that the best sort of size of your leadership team should be between 3 and 12 leaders. And each of those should only sit for ideally a maximum of 9 years at a time. That's normally broken down into sort of 3 terms of 3 years.
Which is a real challenge in it when you're talking about volunteers in football clubs and them wanting to do it. But if you want clubs to progress and evolve and thrive like we talk about, you want diversification of thought and ideas and people coming in from different areas of business and organisations and being able to bring that knowledge, experience, expertise into the football landscape, which sometimes we see in football clubs. They might have great business acumen and then they come into football and it can be treated ever so slightly differently.
Yeah.
So it's seeking out and finding them truly good leaders.
And Tom's final question has sprung one in my mind. So final question, I promise. Because hearing you there say about the advice about like 10 years and stuff like that, are there any rules around decision making at all that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so there are, and it's sort of our job to make sure that clubs are clued up on what those decision making rules are, and they're usually found in the club's governing documents. So again, sort of depending on how you're structured, it'll either be called your constitution or it'll be your articles of association. And the most sort of common pattern we see is that the key decisions are assigned to the board or the committee members on a majority vote basis. So this can really cover anything from sort of your overall budget to player contracts, fan engagement, and sort of everything in between. And we sort of recommend that the leaders should meet often enough so that they can oversee the direction of all of these things. So 4 times a year is usually about a good baseline to make sure that you can really make decisions in an effective manner. And again, if you look at your governing document, you quite often will see in situations where there's deadlock on the leadership board, there's often a chair who will get the casting vote or the deciding vote, but it's important to check your governing document to make sure that power's in there.
Some really, really good little bullet points there for people to take a note of and make those kind of the principles of those decision making. The rules, I suppose, are really, really important. Tom, Carla, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for all of your help. And we heard earlier from James how much the services of Muckle, the team here, and the wider team as well, has been really, really helpful. We're going to take a quick pause now and hear from another football club who Muckle have helped around leadership. A wonderful club. Here is Euxton Villa.
Graham, firstly, thank you so much for joining us. I understand that your football club has been on a real journey when it comes to governance. I've heard a bit of a restructure took place. Can you tell us about what sparked off that initial conversation at the football club that you needed to look at governance?
Well, sadly, I mean, the club was what they class as a non-legal entity a couple of years ago, and we had trustees who sort of oversaw the club itself, made sure that it remained a football club. But as anything, the trustees started to leave, mainly because I think 2 out of the 4 sadly passed away, and one of the other 2 wanted to step down. So we started that conversation about trying to change the trustees. So that was sort of the initial action, and then we met Mark Hilton from the club program, and he had a look at the club and suggested, well, perhaps you should look at a legal entity, give yourself a bit more stability, help with sustainability, and also we were sort of running parallel with trying to apply for a grant from the Football Foundation for a new artificial grass pitch. So that also changed the focus of the club, where we were a grassroots club, covered our bills, no other sort of major plans other than that. And then if we were successful, then we'd become a small business. So we'd have to change our rationale, including the governance, to make sure that we can operate efficiently.
I want to ask you about the 3G pitch and how getting your governance structure right helped with that a little bit later on. But as you mentioned there, the journey, it can sound a little bit daunting, particularly for volunteers who are legal guardians or whatever their position is on a committee. How much did you know previously about the different legal tax structures before you engaged with Muckle?
Very little. We sort of looked at the cask route that some clubs have gone down in terms of the tax there. We looked at VAT, but we weren't really operating at those levels to sort of sustain that, or even to think it would be beneficial. So I suppose we know very little, really, because it is fair to say.
So did that therefore make the initial conversations with Muckle helpful and beneficial? How much did they kind of guide you through, which I describe as a minefield, because I know it can be quite complex?
It is a minefield. Yeah, well, I mean, Muckle were brilliant. Obviously, that's their expertise, but I think without them, clubs would really struggle without any legal representation. Because as I say, it is a minefield. You've got all the sort of bits and bobs of a non-legal thing. You've got to transfer all your assets. You've got to change your bank accounts. You've got to change we own the land, so we had to change the land registry. There's lots of things that need to be put in place. We've got to tell the FA, because our first team are in the National League, so we need to request to change membership or details of our membership with the National League. So yeah, it's quite complex.
Well, I'm glad that you had that support there, and it has enabled you to take some really successful steps. You mentioned about getting the 3G as well. You've had it built, and with the correct governance setup, you were able to reclaim that, I understand. How was that possible?
So it was all about timing, really. We had a VAT expert from the FA who helped us tremendously, made sure we got all our ducks in a row in terms of timing, because timing was quite crucial in terms of reclaiming the VAT during the build of the pitch. And obviously the Football Foundation were key that we sort of got things in place to make sure that we could reclaim that VAT, because it was extra money for them if we couldn't. So yeah, we made it with the help of the experts.
And at your football club, of course, you're going to have some really dedicated volunteers who give up a lot of their time. But I just wondered, without the support of the the club programme and the professional services of Muckle, do you think you would have been able to undertake a governance restructure like this?
No, I don't think we would. And I don't think, and I think the volunteers themselves, they've been in place longer than me, and I've been at the club over 30 years. And there isn't a queue of people coming alongside. So I think it was almost incumbent upon the club to sort of say, well, we need something more sustainable, because relying on volunteers, you could be looking at people whose lives change, and then it puts the club in, if they're in a key role and their lives change and they move on, then suddenly we've sort of got to fill that gap. So I'm now full-time employee of the club, which helps tremendously. So I can take up a lot of the slack that the volunteers are doing, because we couldn't run a club of our size anymore based on people's free time. It's just not practical or realistic.
And you highlight a really good point there, that when football clubs, grassroots football clubs, do grow to such a stature, like many three-star accredited clubs do with various player pathways, it's a bold step for some, actually moving into that part where you have a workforce where some of it's paid and some of it is volunteer is so key to sustainability. Was it a challenge to convince the committee that you needed to make that step of getting some paid support, or was it actually, no, we understand this is the key to making sure that our football club is here for the next 10, 20, 30 years?
No, it was lots of conversations, and I had to put a case forward for the committee members to discuss, and to the club, because it wasn't just the committee members, it was all the coaches. We have up to about 100 volunteers. So there's a lot of people to sort of get their views and make sure we have their support, because obviously if we didn't have their support, then we would struggle to make those changes. But the business case sort of lent itself to say, well, really, if, as you say, we're going to grow, this is probably one of the only realistic options we can pursue, really.
And listening to you, Graham, it seems to me that getting the governance structure right really provided some solid foundations for you to push on into other elements, like getting the 3G pitch, like getting paid in support. And I'm sure you've got even more plans for the future. So for those listening into this, what tip do you wish you'd known before beginning this process of a structural governance change? What do you wish you could have told Graham at the start of the process that you'd tell someone who's perhaps listening to thinking, oh, actually, I might need to do the same at my football club?
I think you've got to undertake a comprehensive view of the club and in comparison to the business plan that you're proposing, because if you haven't got the people to go with you on that journey, certainly at the beginning, because that's probably the most challenging, from changing from one entity to another, that's the most challenging. You would really struggle. So I would say make sure that you've got people who understand what you're trying to achieve before you begin that journey. Because once you start, it's sort of, I wouldn't say it's you can't stop it from going, but it's certainly, the momentum is such that you can't sort of put the brakes on and say, well, hang on, let's just have another think about this. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right thing, you've got the right plans, people are with you, and you sort of know where you're going in terms of the project.
Well, Graham, that is a perfect answer to end on, because I think no matter what the subject is in grassroots football, people are the most important thing. And I'm so pleased that the journey that you've gone on around governance and structure has just enabled you and the football club to grow from strength to strength. I wish you all the best for the season, and also for you on your journey at the football club as well. It sounds like you've dedicated a lot of time to get into such a good position. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you, Charlotte.
It's great to hear from such a wonderful football club again, with a fantastic example around leadership and why it is so important within football clubs, not just for sharing and leading that vision, but also about making decisions around things such as good governance and legal identity.
Yeah, absolutely loved this episode, and how leadership almost is the glue that pieces so much of the football governance together. A reminder, we do have one more episode in our 4-part series coming up, so make sure that you stay in touch. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the Club Hub on YouTube so you're the first to know when our episodes drop. And perhaps you might have some examples of great football governance and leadership at your club. Let us know, comment in the section below, and until next time, goodbye.